Hello everybody, I am Jared Ross, the GeneaVlogger, and welcome back to another Professional Genealogist Reacts. On today's video, I will be reacting to Patrick Stewart's father unknowingly suffered from shell shock from Who Do You Think You Are? This is part 5 of our series following the Patrick Stewart clips of Who Do You Think You Are? And in the last clip, Patrick Stewart learned about his father being at the bombing of Abbeville, learned about how the trains were strafed and civilians coming out of the town, and he ended up remembering a story that his father had told him, which he thought happened there. On this one, I'm guessing we're going to learn a bit more about more of his service. It seems like maybe they're going to focus a bit on when he's coming home if they're talking about his shell shock. But this is only part 5, and I know there's until part 8, and I think all of them deal with his father. So, not quite sure what to expect, so I won't really say anything else. But before we do begin, please be sure to give this a like. That really does help me out. Also, be sure to subscribe and click that bell for notifications on future videos. With all that fun stuff said, let's go ahead and watch the video.
By now, the Coily were cut off from the Allies in the north, who were surrounded by the Nazis in a small patch of land by the coast. In late May 1940, the evacuation of over 300,000 Allied troops from Dunkirk began. But Alfred and the rest of the Coily stayed in France for one last desperate attempt to delay the German advance to Paris.
That's actually really interesting that in the past parts, we saw his father's unit, the Coilies, were supposed to be like a background unit, far away from the front, just doing like hard labor type of stuff, I guess, like building railroad tracks and stuff like that. So it's interesting that they would now be holding back the Germans as best possible while everybody else was retreating. So they literally went from a unit that's in the back to now the unit that everybody's relying on to allow them to escape. So that had to have been tough.
However, they were no match for the Panzer divisions and were soon forced into retreat. The Germans entered Paris on June the 14th. 3 days later, Alfred was amongst the last British troops to leave France. He was evacuated from Cherbourg just hours before it fell to the enemy.
They'd had a pretty ghastly experience.
Yeah.
And one that had come upon them so unexpectedly that the impact of it must have been that much greater.
I think so, and perhaps this will give you some idea of what that impact was.
Murfield sergeant back from France. I would imagine this cutting came from the Murfield and District Reporter.
That's right.
A newspaper on which some 15 years later I was to be a very insignificant junior reporter. Same newspaper. Among the Coilies who have returned safely from France. Is Sergeant Alfred Stewart of Cam Lane, Murfield. Sergeant? When did that happen?
At some point between here and him getting home, he was made a sergeant.
He has been in France 3 months and seen a great deal of the recent hard fighting, coming through many bombing and machine gunning attacks. The brutality of the Germans against civilian refugee children has left a deeper impression than anything else of his experiences. Sergeant Stewart says he had no rest for 3 weeks and little substantial food, but did fine work in leading his men. He was promoted sergeant at the front. He escaped from Cherbourg before the German advance troops arrived, but in an aerial attack, a nearby bomb explosion gave him shell shock, from which he still suffers. We know now that it builds up a level of stress and anger. And of course, what I experienced from 1945 onwards was an angry man.
Yeah.
Who maybe hadn't been angry before.
No.
I am seeing a story here now. Not only a narrative of this happened, then that happened, then that happened, but perhaps far more importantly, a psychological story.
All right. Well, that one was quick but very interesting. I will say it was interesting to hear in the news article from his father that he said the one thing that really stood out was the Germans' brutality against civilian children. And I think about in one of the earlier clips how Patrick Stewart had talked about his father being violent and throwing things at his mother, but never laying a hand on his kids. And I wonder if maybe it comes from that, you know, he sees it similar to, you know, what the Germans did. I don't know for sure, but it's kind of just an interesting correlation that I thought maybe that's why. Very interesting story. Obviously, he keeps fighting in the war because he came home in 1945, and this was only 1940. But like I thought in the previous clips, he ended up being at Dunkirk. Surprisingly, was one of the last to leave, actually trying to hold off the Germans. So that's pretty crazy. So I'm guessing in the next clip, they're going to go into more of his service. Well, thank you so much for checking out this video. I do hope that you enjoyed. If you did, please be sure to give it a like. That really does help me out. You can also click right about here if you'd like to subscribe. It is completely free to do so. And if you'd like to get access to my content early or even access to exclusive content, be sure to become a patron of mine on Patreon, and you'll also be helping out the channel if you do so. And if you'd like, you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at GeneaVlogger. I'm the GeneaVlogger. See you in my next video.